In this session, we will go through a quick walkthrough of setting up a continuous deployment pipeline of a very simple web application. The idea is to get familiar with the configuration and deployment steps and see how AWS CodePipeline and AWS CodeDeploy can work together. During subsequent sessions, we will use similar procedures to deploy a more complicated real-world application using same AWS services. In this video, we will create a sample application and deploy it through a simple AWS code pipeline. First, let's create an application and deploy it through AWS CodeDeploy. Let's go to the CodeDeploy console and click Get Started Now button. AWS CodeDeploy provides a sample application for us to play around with and get familiar with AWS CodeDeploy features. Now, in order to deploy this sample application, we will need some EC2 instances. One option is to set up all this infrastructure manually ourselves, but AWS CodeDeploy makes it much easier for us to set it up. It provides a wizard for us to set up 3 EC2 instances via AWS CloudFormation to host our sample application. So let's go through the process of setting up those EC2 instances now. Here we need to make sure that the logged in AWS user has privileges to launch new instances, which in our case we do. On this welcome page, we are going to choose sample deployment because we want to deploy the AWS provided sample application. Now let's click Next Step button. On this instance setting page, let's choose Amazon Linux as our operating system and leave the instance type as it is. And let's choose a pre-created key pair from the key pair name drop-down list box. Let's leave the tag part as it is. And let's click Launch Instances. This will bring up 3 EC2 instances where our sample application will be deployed. This may take a few minutes. Behind the scenes, AWS CodeDeploy is using AWS CloudFormation to deploy 3 EC2 instances with the tags Code Deployment Demo. This process will also install CodeDeploy agents on these EC2 instance machines and assign proper IAM instance profile to these instances. Okay, now all the instances are ready. Let's take a quick look at these EC2 instances. Here we can see 3 EC2 instances are running with the same name as CodeDeploy Demo. Let's go to the instance setting page again and click Next Step to continue. Now, since our EC2 instances are up and running, let's continue with our application deployment. First, let's create an application. Let's use the default name Demo Application as our application name and click Next Step. On this revision page, let's click Download Sample Bundle button and save it for our later use. This Linux sample will install Apache web server and a simple web page on our EC2 instances. This will be our demo application. Now let's click Next Step. On this deployment group page, we can name our deployment group. This could be our staging or production or dev deployment group. Here we can specify which EC2 instance should be targeted by this particular deployment group. The key and value columns should be auto-populated with the values from step 3. The instances column displays the number of EC2 instances that we will deploy the code to. And here we have launched 3 EC2 instances and we have assigned the same name to them, Code Deploy Demo. All these instances have already been tagged together into a deployment group. So that verifies that CodeDeploy was able to detect all 3 target EC2 instances. So let's leave everything as it is and click Next Step. This service role is an IAM role which is used by CodeDeploy to interact with other AWS services like EC2, autoscaling, etc. On this service role page, we select the preset service role and click Next Step. Next step is the deployment configuration. On this deployment configuration page, let's choose the default configuration one at a time and click Next Step. Last step is to review the details of our deployment. Here we can verify our configuration we are going to use for this CodeDeploy deployment. Here we can see that we have already specified what to deploy, how to deploy it, and where to deploy it. Now let's go ahead and click the Deploy Now button. The deployment process has started, and currently we can see 3 instances are in pending state. Our sample revision deploys our application on each one of these instances one at a time. So that process will take a few minutes. Okay, now our 2 instances are deployed successfully and 1 instance is still in progress. Alright, here we go. Now all 3 instances have been deployed successfully. Let's check whether the sample application is deployed successfully or not. Let's first view all the deployed instances by clicking View All Instances tab. And here we can see all the instances onto which we have deployed our demo application. Let's click one of the instances. This will take us to the EC2 dashboard where we can review the instance details. Let's check whether our sample application has deployed successfully or not by using the public DNS address of this instance. So first, let's copy the address in the public DNS field in the bottom panel and paste it into our browser address bar. So as we can see that the demo application is loading successfully, which verifies that the application was deployed successfully using AWS CodeDeploy. Now that we have successfully deployed our code via CodeDeploy, let's make this deployment a part of a continuous delivery pipeline by implementing AWS CodePipeline. So let's go through the process of setting up a simple AWS CodePipeline to deploy the same code that we used in our demo application. AWS CodePipeline can work with code stored in S3 buckets or GitHub repositories. For now, let's just use S3 buckets as our source location. So the first step we need to take here is to create an S3 bucket. Let's go to the S3 console and click Create Bucket tab. Let's enter a bucket name. Let's name this bucket My Applications. And for this demo, let's select Oregon region from the region drop-down list. We can pick pretty much any AWS region which is closer to yours or your customer's physical location. Now finally click the Create button to create the bucket. Okay, there we have created our My Applications bucket. Let's click on this bucket to view its properties. So the properties of our bucket My Applications show up in the right-hand panel. Now we are going to enable versioning on this bucket by clicking Enable Versioning tab. This is required for creating continuous deployment pipelines via AWS CodePipeline. Okay, so now it is time for us to upload our code to this bucket so that CodePipeline can pick it up. Let's click our My Applications bucket and upload the sample bundle which we have downloaded in our previous step. Let's click Upload tab, and in this Upload Select Files and Folder dialog box, click Add Files. We will select our sample app.linux.zip and click Start Upload button. Okay, there we go. Now we have successfully uploaded the file to our target S3 bucket. Now we are ready to create a continuous delivery pipeline. So let's get back to our AWS CodePipeline console. This is the first step in creating a code pipeline. Here, let's enter the pipeline name as sample code pipeline and click Next Step. In this step, we need to provide the source location. So let's select Amazon S3 as our source provider and enter the Amazon S3 location for our source, which is s3:/ My Applications sample app linux.zip. And here S3 is the protocol, My Applications is the bucket name, and sample app linux.zip is the file name which we have uploaded earlier. Now let's click the next step. Third step is to build the pipeline. But to keep it simple, we are not going to build this pipeline since our deployment only has a simple web page and it does not need any code which needs to be built or compiled. So let's choose No Build from the drop-down list and click Next Step. Fourth step is the beta, which is the deployment step. For the deployment provider, let's choose AWS CodeDeploy because the deployment is the responsibility of our CodeDeploy configuration, which we have already set up in previous part of this video. Let's choose demo application for the application name and deploy fleet for our deployment group. Now let's click Next Step. Fifth step is the service role. Let's select an existing role for role name and click next step. In this last step, we review the setup and click create pipeline. Okay, now we have created a pipeline. Now all that is left to do is to test our pipeline. The first step is source. It pulls our source code from the source provider. In this case, it is AWS S3. In the next step, our sample application calls the CodeDeploy to deploy our sample application to the EC2 instances. It will take a few minutes, so let's wait for the whole process to finish. Okay, we have successfully tested the pipeline. Let's check our sample application once again. Let's click on the details link, and here we can see our sample application has been deployed on 3 EC2 instances. Let's click on any one of the instances. Now let's copy the public DNS URL and paste it into our browser URL address bar and press enter. Cool, the page was deployed successfully. Next, we would suggest deleting all the pipelines and CodeDeploy applications and EC2 instances so that we won't be charged for using up these resources. We will deploy them once again once we go through setting up our real code pipeline and CodeDeploy applications. Now let's get back to the EC2 management console again. Let's search for CodeDeploy demo in the search bar and now select the 3 CodeDeploy demo instances and select terminate option under the action menu. So now we have terminated our instances. Similarly, let's delete our application. Let's go to the AWS CodeDeploy console and select applications under AWS console deploy menu. On this page, click our demo application and now click delete application. So our CodeDeploy application has also been deleted. Now let's get back to Code Pipeline tab. Under our sample Code Pipeline, click Edit tab and finally click Delete button. So now we have cleaned up all the resources that we set up during this session.